97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher, powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
We expect to win every time we step on the field. That's just the mindset that we have.
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
All right, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher's in today. Football at 4 brought to you by Cape May County. Top-rated beaches, ample space to spread out in Cape May County. You can enjoy fine dining, shopping, hiking, trails, and more. Make some memories just down the road in Cape May. For information online, go to escapetothejerseycape.com. Mike Gill, Hunter Brody, Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline as we take a look at some of the Eagles and NFL news, as there's a lot of NFL news happening right now, and Eagles news today. Eagles news yesterday was an interesting day when we got the news. I guess it's not like shockingly or stunningly surprising that Jason Peters signed. I guess it's more, hey, that the Eagles not only announced the signing, that in that signing, in their own graphic, they signed guard Jason Peters. So I guess the intention is to play him at guard. The question is, which guard will it be?
It's going to be right guard. That he's going to be the replacement, or at least one of the potential replacements for Brandon Brooks. And so we will see. This to me is a move that in some ways makes sense because you know who Jason Peters is. He's been a part of the program for a long time now. He's a future Hall of Famer. They were looking for someone who has versatility, but at the same time, he's never played, at least as an offensive lineman for the past 16 years on the right side, and he has not played guard. And I know you've had Trey Thomas on your show in the past, and as have we on Inside the Birds, talking about the differences in playing tackle versus guard, how you're dealing with a bigger lineman, how you're dealing with less space, more lateral movement in some cases. And so to me, while Jason Peters it becomes an answer at right guard, I think his presence also creates a lot of questions too.
All right, so here's a question that I guess kind of comes from this then. You're right. Trey has been on both programs and kind of insinuated that you don't just ask a guy to play left tackle and then move him over to right guard and expect he's going to be a Hall of Fame level player. So in your opinion, I guess, is that the best move to play him at right guard, or would you bring him back and play left guard?
Well, if you bring him back to play left guard, you might make him more comfortable in a sense because it's his left side, but you don't eliminate the obstacle of the fact that he is a guard now and still going up against a different caliber of linemen and still being asked to move differently, less space. I mean, it's a different position, and it's a position that requires a lot more of that head-on collision and that constant wear on your body that sometimes you can avoid at offensive tackle, say if the play is in the other direction, where in guard there's always something going on. So you're talking about a 38-year-old guy who's had trouble staying healthy at various points of his career over the last 3 or 4 years. Even when he played 2 years ago, I think he played all 16 games, but he came out a few times. Last year he missed, I think, 4 starts. So you're now putting him at a more physically demanding position and expecting him to hold up. I think that part, even if it were to be left guard, that still becomes a question. And then now you have to take Isaac Seumalo, who has been your left guard for the last 2 years, and then move him to right guard and make him readjust to the position. And I don't think that they like having to do that. So they'd rather have one guy making the adjustment rather than two, which is why it seems to me that they'll at least start off with Jason Peters at right guard.
Do you think that Andre Dillard would now feel more pressure, like he's looking over his shoulder? If he doesn't play well, if he's not playing to the level that he needs to, that maybe Jason Peters will take the spot from him?
I mean, I think, yeah, that's inevitable, Hunter, but I think it's important to remember that the Eagles have been talking to Jason Peters and his representation since the end of the season. So there was always the chance he was going to come back, whether or not Brandon Brooks got hurt. because they needed more experience. They needed even a potentially a swing tackle to play Big V's spot off the bench, although I'm sure Jason Peters wasn't thrilled with being a bench player, but that's why nothing had happened up until now. This gives him an opportunity to start, but I do think that if you're Andre Dillard and you're struggling, the team knows it's got an opportunity to move Jason Peters back there and then maybe fill that hole at right guard with Matt Pryor. So yes, I think the spotlight was on Andre Dillard already coming into this year's camp because of the murmurs in the offseason about the team maybe putting him on the trade market and things like that, the rumors that you heard. And then, of course, with Jason Peters being back, I think that'll no matter where. If Jason Peters was back to play wide receiver, I still think Andre Dillard would be feeling the pinch there at left tackle.
It's such a hard change for Jason Peters, though. I mean, you're moving from the left side, and now you're going up against tackles more so than edge rushers. And I just wonder, is it possible that he struggles so much that Matt Pryor, who is more accustomed to that position, could maybe even beat him out?
Possible, yes, because anything is possible. I mean, first of all, Jason's going to have to stay healthy and make it to at least the opening kick whenever that's going to be. I thought Adam Schefter's tweet when he broke the news was interesting, too, because he tweeted that Peters would be playing guard to try to fill the hole left by Brandon Brooks. Not to fill the hole, but to try to. So I thought that was interesting wording and phrasing, perhaps that there was a little bit of doubt on the side of the team as to whether or not this is going to work. I mean, it's worth having him here. It's not cost prohibitive. If he's obviously a good player, he's going to make even from $3 to $6 million, so that helps them out. But yeah, I don't know that anything is a slam dunk for a lot of the reasons that we just discussed. And I think that it's a fair discussion to have about whether or not this is even a good or smart move. It makes the Eagles better, no doubt about it, because Jason Peters is a hell of an athlete and a future Hall of Famer. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to make this transition, whereas it's a difficult one. Other people can't, but it wouldn't surprise me if he could. But at what point, if you consider yourself a draft and develop franchise like the Eagles have said that they are, at what point do you just cut the cord and go ahead with guys that you've drafted? Because they've drafted a lot of linemen over the past few years.
Well, I guess then what's the message? Is it the message that, hey, we think we're good enough, we're not so sure because of the lack of training camp, what we're getting at that right guard position or the left tackle position, let's bring him in, say he's a guard. If our left tackle flounders, we can bump him out there, and if he's good enough to play right guard, but we want to take a shot because we think we're good enough.
Yeah, and I've been an advocate on our podcast, Inside the Birds, of saying you can still do that by signing a veteran offensive lineman, not named Jason Peters, who has swing versatility to be able to play tackle or guard, but isn't so established and doesn't come with a certain amount of cachet that you automatically hand him the job over Matt Pryor. You can have them compete. You give Pryor the lead because he is the guy who's been in your program and you drafted, but if he does not hold up his end of the bargain, you go to somebody else. The fact that it's always Jason Peters at 38 years old, to me, is a little bit clingy. I really do believe that. I think that, most teams, I mean, outside of Tom Brady, what other team does this with a player at a non-quarterback position? Brings in a guy of that age to constantly, even 3 or 4 years after the guy has almost seemingly been, after the team has been ready to move on.
Yeah, and I would agree with you to some extent. The only thing I guess you could throw in the caveat is this year's a little different. You got Jason Peters. Now he's playing guard. He's got to learn a new position, but he knows the offense theoretically, as opposed to bringing somebody else in.
Yeah, again, this is not, to me, slam dunk right or wrong. I'm just presenting what I think is the downside of it. There certainly is an upside of it. But, you bring up the point about knowing the offense. I was under the impression, I think a lot of people are, that they brought in Rich Scangarello as a senior offensive assistant to really bring that Kyle Shanahan-style run concept. I mean, he's not going to completely transform the whole offense, but specifically the running game is one that needed a little bit of juice to it as far as, what it's looked like compared to what it can look like. The Shanahan style is a lot of misdirection, a lot of pre-snap motion. You have your guards always on the move, kicking out. A lot of athleticism is required, and that's a lot of workload. And so, Jason Peters at 38 years old, now playing guard, are they going to scrap what they had hoped for with that kind of style? Or are they going to go right ahead and say, all right, Peters, you're going to be outside zone this time, outside zone next time, kick him out to the second line? That's a lot to ask for him. I know he's a great athlete, but he's 38, not 28. And so you do wonder about what they want to do with the offense and what if there's any limitations now that they have this guy playing right guard for the first time in his career.
And by the way, in that tweet by Schefter, he says he wants to play till he's 40. So I guess the question would be, what if he plays well? What if he's a good right guard and he plays well? Then what?
That's a great question. I mean, you have to. I feel like every team's got to have a cutoff point, right? The Patriots clearly had a cutoff point with arguably the greatest player of all time. And again, the Eagles have drafted plenty of offensive linemen over the past 2 or 3 years between Pryor or even signed guys that they really liked as rookie free agents. You've got Pryor, Driscoll, Opeta, Herbig, Tego Inago. So they brought in guys that they have believed in and into their system at some point. If you're a good – and they love Jeff Stoutland. They talk about him all the time as being one of the best offensive line coaches in the league. Well, if you're confident in your coaching staff and your talent procurement staff, you've got to go the next step and give those guys an opportunity to play.
Let's say, hypothetically, something happens to Lane Johnson in the middle of the season, he goes down. Do you think Jason Peters then slides to right tackle and then moves over again? Or do you think that that's an opportunity for Pryor or Mailata to step in and you keep Jason Peters at right guard?
We've talked about this, right? The difference between wanting versatility to decide where an offensive lineman will play to start the season and then keeping that lineman in that spot if you can in the middle of the year because that's where he's practicing. So if there were something to happen to Lane Johnson with Jason Peters at right guard and seemingly playing okay enough to keep the job there or well enough to keep the job, I think that they would look to find a right tackle replacement. Matt Pryor has played tackle in college. And as you mentioned, Jordan Mailata is a guy that they are just hoping stays healthy and continues his progression because they really liked what they saw from him last year in training camp. And he was mostly practicing at right tackle, if I believe. And they want him to seize that kind of job and to be that top tackle off the bench. So there's a lot to be proven on his part, but I would think that they would rather go with Mailata in that case than move Lane and then put somebody new at right guard.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast here on Football at 4, talking Little Eagles. Of course, Jason Peters signed yesterday. What's the plan? And then, it gets – you mentioned about a swing tackle. I guess they're looking at Pryor to be kind of their Vitae. Like, that keeps him in the role that they envisioned for him. Maybe they just didn't think he was ready. Like, that's the role they wanted for him and didn't think he was really ready to be in the starting right guard. Like, he can handle it, but they wanted him to be in that role because they don't really have anybody else to fill that role.
Right. The big issue was that Matt Pryor has only one start in his NFL career. And so if he's starting right guard, what happens if somebody on that line gets hurt? Let's say Pryor gets hurt or anybody else. Who's the next man up? The next man up is either Nate Herbig or Mailata or somebody else we're talking about that has zero NFL experience, right? So now you do have something closer to what you have in the past. You have theoretically Jason Peters starting right guard, holding it down, and Matt Pryor as that swing backup. He can play tackle, he can play guard, he can step in wherever you may need him to step in. So that's what they have right now. Look, this offensive line is, to me, it almost determines the season coming up because in my opinion, it's still the strongest part of the offense. You have a Pro Bowler at, 3 spots? You have maybe 2 Hall of Famers with Peters and Jason Kelce at 1, and we'll see what happens with Lane Johnson's career. But it's no doubt about it, the strongest point of the team when healthy, but it's not very deep right now. And a couple of your guys are really long in the tooth. Obviously, Jason Peters and Jason Kelce, who's had a lot of mileage on him. He's 33 years old. If he gets hurt, then you're really scrambling again.
All right, Geoff, let's move over to the news from yesterday, and then it was kind of backtracked today by the Philadelphia mayor. There was some news that there was going to be no large gatherings, which pretty clearly was stated that included the 2 sports teams. The comments were pretty straightforward and pretty clear by the managing director, Brian Abernathy, who confirmed the Eagles are going to be allowed to play, although without crowds. Also, the health commissioner, Thomas Farley, said There's no way for them to be safe having crowds there. So the large gathering ban was yesterday. Today, the mayor came out and said, well, the Eagles will continue to communicate with their fans, so there's a possibility here. So did somebody over at Lincoln Financial Field or the NovaCare Center pick up the phone?
I would have to think so. I mean, there was a backpedal to the highest degree from Jim Kenney, the mayor, when he said, oh, by the way, those public events moratorium we were speaking of are only about events that require a permit, like a festival and a parade. And then he said sporting events are a little bit different and would be, I think, they're based on current guidance as COVID-19 evolves. So what I found was that was a call was placed from the Eagles, who clearly thought they were going to be exempt from this. And also, it just shows you that this is extraordinarily fluid right now. I think, the Ravens announced today that there'll be no fans in their training camp, even if health officials permit it, because the NFL and NFLPA protocols are already saying no. Same thing with the Packers. They did it yesterday. We're in a very fluid moment with everything here. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the message changes a couple of times, but it didn't shock me at all that the mayor had to kind of come out and say the Eagles were not part of what they were talking about yesterday.
So, all right. Obviously, there's a lot of teams they don't know. What are we feeling about training camp? It feels like each day that goes on, camp's supposed to be in like 12 days. I mean, I was listening to Inside the Birds this morning. You and Adam were talking about it like, hey, they're going to have training camp in like 12 days here. What's the feeling from coaches and front office people as we get closer?
Well, they're kind of preparing to go, but the people I speak to are not exactly sure if they're preparing to go for the right reason. I mean, the coaches, personnel people are creatures of habit. They always want to be prepared, and so they're preparing themselves. But I know it's been expressed to me by a couple of people that I spoke to that they wouldn't be surprised if the start of camp was delayed. I mean, as you and I and Hunter, we talk here at 4 o'clock, there's an ongoing conference call with and it might be over by now, but there was a long conference call with the NFLPA reps about the calls that are going on between the NFL and the NFLPA. There, I believe, was a report from NFL Network that they're still apart on some key issues, including preseason games and finances. And until that's worked out, until these return to work protocols are hammered down, then there's going to be uncertainty about whether camp starts on time. So every day that we get closer and there's not an agreement is a day that you kind of wonder, well, what's going to happen with the start of training camp? But however, as Andrew Brandt likes to say, deadlines create action, right? And so if July 28th is the day that the NFL really wants to get going, and the players, then they'll figure it out.
We have a poll up today, and it asks, do you think that we will have the NFL football season at all? And the answer is, or the options are yes, start on time, yes, won't start on time, or no. How do you vote on this poll?
I would vote yes and start on time, because I do believe that you don't have to even there's no reading the tea leaves here with the NFL. The NFL wants to go. It wants to play. It wants everything to be normal, and it'll just make adjustments based on fans in the stands or not, or COVID testing and what needs to be done. The NFL wants to go. I believe the players, for the most part, want to play. They just want to have their health and safety be prioritized. And so I do think that there will be a season. It may be a whole lot different than what we expect, but I guess I'm feeling a little bit more optimistic than maybe 2, 3, or 4 weeks ago, because you're seeing soccer in Europe being played. You're still seeing, I think, baseball in Asian countries being played. We're seeing the return of the NBA and baseball here. I was impressed and encouraged, I should say, by the very low number of baseball players who tested positive, and now they're all doing their, training camps, if you will, and the baseball season is expected to start. So as long as these things continue to trend in a positive direction, I feel like the NFL will feed off that and just keep putting the pedal to the metal.
Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. Of course, football at 4. We talk NFL, Eagles each and every day at 4 o'clock right here on the Sports Bash. And then, you look at Jason Peters. Now, Brian Balderinger had put out that this was good. There was a big move coming. First off, is that the move he was referring to? Or is there something else on the horizon still for Howie Roseman?
Well, I mean, I believe that was the move Brian Baldinger was referring to. He's a former offensive lineman. He was at the offensive line summit last weekend in Dallas with Leighton Johnson and with some other, prominent offensive linemen. So I'm sure the word was going around. So that's what I'd be positive of. Now, does that mean that Howie doesn't have another move left in him? As we know, Jadeveon Clowney is still unsigned. And we know that Clowney and Ngakoue wants out of Jacksonville. And again, with both of those guys, it comes down to what do you have to give up, whether it's either draft picks or cost financially to bring a guy in. Howie is not afraid to be aggressive, but we've gone through the issues that the Eagles have financially. I mean, they're up against the wall next year, the year after. There's a prospect. It looks more and more likely that without fans, that the salary cap will take a hit in the next few years, and that's not going to help the Eagles out any. So it's not going to be easy to get any of these guys unless something happens where they get them at a bargain rate.
Ngakoue is interesting. Nobody signed their franchise tags. Any thought on what could be his future? He's a name that the Eagles were kind of mingled in some time ago.
Yeah, well, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is that he has come out and said he's willing to play on the franchise tag. So that helps for some teams that may want to be able to acquire him but can't necessarily or don't know how to structure him long term yet. I mean, you can take the risk and at least get him for 1 year and not have to worry that he's not going to play. So that helps. What hurts is the COVID situation, the fact that money is not flowing right now. I mean, I know Derrick Henry is about to sign a big deal, and the Chiefs have been giving money away to their worthy players. But in general, you're not seeing a whole lot of huge spending. And the fact that Jadeveon Clowney is still out there this close to the start of camp just shows that. So I don't know that anybody's going to trade for Ngakoue right now without, really thinking about the financial ramifications of it.
Last one for Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. Check it out. I listened this morning. Great stuff in there, as always. And, of course, tomorrow, Adam Kaplan is here on Football at 4. Pelissero from the NFL Network reporting the league's latest proposal includes 2 preseason games. The Players Association wants nothing, and they want no preseason plus testing frequency and injury protections for those who contract COVID. So there's still a lot that needs to be ironed out here. But your guess, 2 preseasons or nothing?
I would guess nothing. I feel like the players really believe that this is a non-starter for them. That they should have, that they really would feel safest without preseason games.
So
just
real quick, does this have the feel of baseball then, where it was like, they're going to play, and then the next thing you know, we had a 2-month-long back and forth of them couldn't figure it out?
Well, I mean, we're talking about a players' association and owners. And so, as I always say, one side could present the most beautiful, most perfect, most well-articulated, and most sensible rationale in paper of an agreement, and the other side, just no matter what, in principle, will say, that's not good, right? I mean, that just happens all the time. So we'll see. I don't know if it's going to get as acrimonious as it did with baseball, but I guess the potential is always there. It just seems like this one is down to just a few key issues that I think that they can navigate.
All right, at Geoff Mosher NFL, Football at 4, of course, the Inside the Birds podcast. Check that out, and check out InsideTheBirds.com for more from the guys. Tomorrow it's Adam Kaplan. Friday it's Andrew DeCecco, and Football at 4 with all the latest on the NFL. Geoff Mosher, you're a gentleman and a scholar.
I am neither, but thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, like all guests appeared. We're the Boardwalk on the hotline.
Not a gentleman. He said he's neither.
Yeah, he said I'm not a gentleman. I would say 100% Geoff Mosher is a gentleman.
I would have to agree with that.